Well, good evening, friends. It's a rather cold and snowy evening here in West Michigan, at least here. Hopefully, where you are, it's maybe a little bit warmer. But it's also the 155th anniversary of the death of Abraham Lincoln. And so I thought it might be appropriate to do a little fireside chat here and talk about the eulogies and some of the sermons that were preached on the occasion of the death of Abraham Lincoln. So in Lincoln's time, it was fairly common for the elders of a church to compliment their pastors by by having their sermons published. And so many of the sermons and eulogies of Abraham Lincoln have been published. And when they were published, they often took kind of a pamphlet form. Here's an example of one from Boston by Elias Nason. And here's one that's near and dear to my heart. Um, this is from the New York, and it is the First Reformed Dutch Church of New York. Um, excuse me, New Brunswick, New Jersey. Another example of one. This one is from the First Congregational Unitarian Church in Detroit, Michigan. Again, kind of close to home for me anyway. One of the more common ones, this is it's not really a sermon, but it's the eulogy preached by or given by Charles Sumner in Boston. A couple of interesting, unusual ones. This one is by Newman Hall in Surrey Chapel in London, England. Here's one. This is actually in German from Buffalo, New York. And then I have another one in German that was actually preached in Berlin. And then I have one curious one here. This is a little larger volume here, but this is along the same vein in France, in French. And I have a bound one here. This is by Edwin Webb in Boston. And on this one, I happen to have a photograph of the Reverend Webb. A rather kindly looking gentleman, I believe. So there have been two good studies that have been done of these sermons. The first one was by J. Monahan in 1945, and he did an analysis of these sermons. And Monahan actually published a whole catalog of the Lincolnia from the Illinois State Historical Society. And when he went through that, he identified almost 400 sermons that were attributed to being eulogies of Abraham Lincoln. And he did an analysis of those 400 sermons. And interestingly enough, he found that they were actually largely rather vindictive type sermons. So in his analysis, he found that based on, he did his analysis based on some of the different denominations. And what he found when he did his study, this is according to his study in 1945, that the sermons he analyzed, 80% of those preached by Unitarians were in a rather vindictive mode, followed by Lutherans, which were 75%. And then but the Episcopalians, Methodists, Baptists, those were more of a 50-50 split, which I thought was it's kind of a curious finding. Now, a more recent study was done by David Cheeseborough, and his study, this was from 1994, and his study is not so much focused on the character of the sermons. He did some interesting studies stating that the dates from which they were preached, and so this is quite interesting. His study, I don't know if they're identical sermons, but presumably not too different. But he found of the 330 some sermons that he analyzed, um, over 102 of them were actually preached on April 16, which, when you think on this here, Lincoln died on the morning of the 15th, and on Easter Sunday morning, on the 16th, these pastors had written sermons that spoke to their congregations about the assassination and the death of Abraham Lincoln in just a little over 24 hours, and that in itself is quite phenomenal. Now, the funeral for Lincoln was held on April 19, and so there were a lot of sermons that were preached around on the 19th then as well, around the country, and about 91 of them that he found. And then the Sunday following that, Cheeseborough finds 58 sermons. And then on June 1, which was a Thursday, it was a day proclaimed by Andrew Johnson as a national day of humiliation, in marking the end of the mourning period for Abraham Lincoln. And there were 68 sermons preached at that time as well, including in his analysis that Cheeseborough did. Over 75% of these sermons were preached in churches in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. So largely an East Coast phenomenon. So I hope you enjoyed just a little discussion here on the Lincoln sermons. And if you did, please like and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you can find me at Stories from the Lincoln Berry Story. So I hope you have a warmer wherever you are, and that you're staying safe and staying healthy. Take care, my friends.